Hello everyone, I'm Natalie Kunzman, MD, and I've had a lot of questions about how to eat if you have POTS. So POTS is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and it's a very uncomfortable condition, and it's associated with several other conditions which we will get into. And I also want to give a disclaimer that make sure you see a cardiologist to definitively diagnose this type of dysautonomia and that it is nothing else playing a role. First of all, when we eat a large meal, the circulation goes right from the periphery to the splanchnic or the intestinal and GI tract. So if a lot of that circulation is going to that area with a heavier meal, people with POTS won't do well with that and will do better with smaller, more frequent meals. Now, to that note, the type of what is ingested, you'll run into trouble if it's a high carbohydrate load because, again, not only that circulation, but the spiking in insulin that goes with that, and then cortisol comes with it. So make sure it's smaller, more frequent meals, a lean protein, vegetation, careful of the carbohydrate loading. Where functional medicine comes into play is the interplay of POTS and mast cell activation. So I firmly believe that people who are hyper responsive with their mast cells and are releasing a lot of histamine, this is at least one of the core triggers because those mast cells are all throughout the interstitium and the fascia and throughout a lot of the organs and around the vasculature and lymphatics. So when histamine releases, it opens or dilates these areas, and this is where the flushing and the low blood pressure and the sweating and the tachycardia comes from a lot of this histamine release. So I usually like to recommend food allergy and food intolerance testing so that there's the ability to actually streamline and be very precise with that diet. Because if you are eating something as a POTS patient that will create a trigger or an allergic response, or God forbid, this histamine release, it's only going to backfire you, and you can figure out those things you need to eliminate and those things that you can include. Now, that being said, there are low histamine diets, which I certainly recommend, and avoiding high histamine diets. So high histamine diets are anything that has fermentation, foods that have sat for a while, which are your fishes and your proteins, and the processed meats. And then, of course, there's a whole vegetables that are higher in histamine, and you might want to avoid that. Alcohol also comes into play with the POTS patient who's also histamine sensitive. And alcohol itself will potentially lower and dilate the blood vessels, but those alcohols that are fermented, such as your wines and beers, are absolutely going to be disastrous for a POTS patient, so we want to avoid those. Now, caffeine and coffee is a little bit interesting because some people do well with that with POTS because it might relieve some of the brain fog that's associated with it. And for other people, it may cause some problems. There you have it, folks, a general assessment of how you eat when you have POTS. Be careful of the timing, be careful of the amount, be careful of what you are eating, especially in that histamine family. And I dare say, find yourself a functional nutritionist or a functional physician who can actually help you dive in deep to those food intolerances and actually use the science to make a dietary plan for you. I'm Natalie Kunzman, MD. You can find me at nataliekunzmanmd.com, as well as several other social media platforms.